The gunshot that shattered the early morning silence in Val Verde, Texas, wasn't meant for Adelaide Harrison, but it sent her wedding carriage careening off the dusty road nonetheless, the driver slumping forward with blood blooming across his shoulder as the horses screamed and bolted into the wilderness. Margaret Rose, dressed in ivory silk and lace that had cost her father 3 months' worth of cattle sales, clutched the leather seat as the world turned into a blur of mesquite trees and rocky outcroppings. Her veil tore free and sailed away like a ghost, disappearing into the September heat of 1878. The carriage hit a boulder, and Margaret felt herself thrown through the air, her body hitting hard earth with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. She lay there gasping, staring up at a sky so blue it hurt, listening to the thunder of hooves fading into the distance for a moment. Everything was silent except for the wind moving through the scrub brush. Then Margaret heard something else. Low, guttural sounds that made her blood freeze. She pushed herself up on trembling arms, her wedding dress now torn and stained with red dust, and saw them. Wolves. At least 5 of them, gray and rangy, moving between her and where the overturned carriage lay 50 yards away. They had scented the injured driver, or maybe they smelled her fear. Either way, their yellow eyes fixed on her with an intelligence that was somehow worse than simple hunger. Margaret scrambled backward, her hands finding purchase on rough stone. Her fiancé was waiting in Val Verde, probably checking his pocket watch and wondering why his bride was late. Adelaide Harrison, the railroad magnate's son from Philadelphia, had seemed like such a catch when her father arranged the match. Now she wondered if she would even live to reach the church. The wolves began to circle closer, their movements coordinated, practiced. Margaret had heard stories about wolf packs from the ranch hands, how they worked together, how they could bring down prey 3 times their size. She was already prey in their eyes. She could see it in the way they moved, patient but purposeful. Then she heard the crack of a rifle. One of the wolves yelped and darted away, blood on its flank. The others scattered momentarily, confused by this new threat. Margaret saw him then, a figure on horseback cresting the ridge to her left, silhouetted against the morning sun. He fired again, this time into the air, and the wolves retreated further, though they didn't flee entirely. They hovered at the edge of the mesquite grove, watching, waiting. The rider came closer, and Margaret could make out details. He was young, maybe 25, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were worn but clean, a faded blue shirt and brown leather vest, chaps dusty from travel. His horse was a paint mare, white and brown patches, sturdy rather than beautiful. He had his rifle trained on the wolves as he approached, not looking at Margaret yet, all his attention on the predators. "Can you stand?" His voice was rough, tinged with what might have been a Colorado accent, though Margaret couldn't be sure. "I think so," she managed, though her legs felt like water. "Then get up slow and move toward me. Don't run. Don't make sudden moves. They are still deciding whether we are worth the trouble." Margaret did as he said, gathering her ruined skirts in her hands and moving carefully across the rocky ground. Her ankle protested, probably twisted in the fall, but she could walk. That was something. As she got closer to the rider, she could see his eyes, pale green and focused, the kind of eyes that noticed everything. He kept the rifle steady, and when she reached his horse, he extended his hand down to her. "Can you climb up?" "Not in this dress," Margaret said, hearing the edge of hysteria in her own voice. "I can barely breathe in this corset." He made a sound that might have been amusement or frustration. "Then hold on to my stirrup and walk beside me. We need to get to better ground." Wolves don't usually attack people unless they are desperate or cornered, but that pack looks hungry enough to try anything. Margaret gripped the stirrup leather with both hands, and the rider began moving his horse at a careful walk, still watching the wolves. They followed at a distance, shadows among the scrub brush. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs, and she kept glancing back, expecting at any moment to feel teeth sinking into her flesh. "Don't look at them," the rider said quietly. "Keep your eyes forward, let me watch them. Who are you?" Margaret asked, needing to hear a human voice, even her own. "Austin Harper," he said. "I work cattle for the Double J Ranch about 20 miles north of here. I was heading to Val Verde for supplies when I heard the gunshot and saw your carriage go off the road. Who shot at you? I don't know." "I didn't see anyone. The driver is injured. We have to help him." "We will, but first we need to get you somewhere safe. There is an old line shack about half a mile ahead. It has walls and a door. We can hold up there until those wolves lose interest." They moved slowly across the landscape, the morning sun climbing higher, turning the air into a furnace. Margaret's dress clung to her skin, the layers of silk and petticoats that had seemed so beautiful in her bedroom now feeling like a prison. Sweat ran down her spine and her mouth was dry as cotton. Austin Harper rode beside her, his posture relaxed but alert, the rifle resting across his saddle now but within easy reach. "What's your name?" he asked after a few minutes of silence. "Margaret Rose." "I was supposed to be getting married today." She saw his eyes flick to her dress, taking in the ivory silk, the lace, the seed pearls that had been sewn by hand. "Supposed to be. I imagine my fiancé is wondering where I am by now. The wedding was set for 10 o'clock. Austin pulled out a pocket watch, checked it, and tucked it away. "It's past 9 now. You are going to be more than fashionably late." Despite everything, Margaret felt a bubble of laughter rise in her throat. It came out sounding slightly unhinged. "My father is going to be furious. This wedding cost him a fortune. Maybe he should have spent some of that fortune on better security for his daughter's wedding day," Austin said, and there was an edge to his voice that suggested he had opinions about wealthy fathers and arranged marriages. The line shack appeared ahead, a rough wooden structure built against a rocky outcropping, its roof sagging but intact. Austin rode up to the door, dismounted in one fluid motion, and pushed it open with his boot. He checked inside, rifle ready, then nodded to Margaret. "It's clear. Get inside." Margaret hobbled through the doorway into blessed shade. The shack was sparse, just one room with a stone fireplace, a crude table, and a wooden bench. It smelled of dust and old smoke, but it had 4 walls and a door that closed. Austin came in behind her, leading his horse. "You are bringing your horse inside?" Margaret asked. "I'm not leaving her out there as wolf bait," Austin said, as if this were obvious. The paint mare didn't seem bothered by the accommodations, just snorted and stamped once before settling. Austin closed the door and dropped a heavy wooden bar across it. Then he moved to the single window, a small opening covered with oiled paper that let in light but not much view. He peered out, checking the perimeter. "They are still out there," he said. 3 of them at least. The other 2 might have gone after easier prey. "How long will they wait?" Margaret asked. She sank onto the wooden bench, her legs finally giving out. "Hard to say. Could be an hour, could be all day. Wolves are patient." He turned from the window and really looked at her for the first time. His eyes traveled over her face, her disheveled hair, the torn dress, the scrapes on her hands. "You are hurt." "Just bruised, I think. My ankle is twisted." Austin knelt in front of her and Margaret tensed. He noticed and held up his hands, palms out. "I'm just going to check your ankle. Make sure it is not broken." She nodded, and he carefully lifted her foot, his hands gentle despite their calluses. He pressed carefully around the joint, and Margaret winced but didn't cry out. His touch was surprisingly careful for someone who clearly spent his days working cattle and sleeping under stars. Not broken, he confirmed, but it is going to swell. You need to keep your weight off it. He stood and went to his saddlebags, pulling out a canteen. Drink some water. You look like you are about to faint. Margaret took the canteen gratefully and drank. The water was warm but tasted like heaven. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was until the first swallow hit her throat. When she lowered the canteen, Austin was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving me. Those wolves would have killed me." "Maybe," Austin said. "Or maybe they would have just stalked you until you died of thirst and heat. Wolves are smart. They don't take unnecessary risks." "That's not particularly comforting," Margaret said. Austin's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Wasn't meant to be comforting. Was meant to be true." They sat in silence for a moment, the reality of the situation settling over them both. Outside, Margaret could hear the wind picking up, whistling through gaps in the wood. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled and another answered. "Your fiancé," Austin said eventually. "Adelaide Harrison. That's who you were supposed to marry. You know him. I know of him. Everyone in Val Verde knows of him. He came to town 3 months ago with plans to build a new rail spur. He's been throwing money around, making deals, stepping on toes." Austin's tone suggested he wasn't a fan. "He's older than you." It wasn't a question, but Margaret answered anyway. "He's 42. My father arranged the marriage. Adelaide has money and connections. I have a respectable family name and suitable breeding." She heard the bitterness in her own voice and was surprised by it. She hadn't realized she was bitter until this moment, when death had been so close and life suddenly felt very different. "And what do you want?" Austin asked. No one had ever asked her that before. Margaret looked at this cowboy with his worn clothes and careful hands, this stranger who had ridden to her rescue, and felt something shift inside her chest. "I wanted to teach," she said quietly. "I wanted to go to normal school and teach children to read. But my father said that was inappropriate for a woman of my station. He said my duty was to marry well and provide connections for the family business." Austin made a sound that might have been disgust. "Seems like a waste. A waste. Of you. Of what you could do." He moved back to the window, checking on the wolves again. "I've known a lot of teachers in my time. Good ones are rare. People who actually care about children learning, about giving them opportunities. Seems like your father is more interested in his business than his daughter's happiness." Margaret felt tears prickling behind her eyes, which was ridiculous. She was 20 years old, not a child, and she had made her peace with her father's decisions months ago, or she thought she had. Now, sitting in this dusty-lined shack with a stranger who seemed to see her more clearly in an hour than her own family had in 20 years, she felt all that careful acceptance crumbling. "I should be grateful," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Adelaide is wealthy. He will provide for me." "Many women have far worse matches. Many women also have choices," Austin said, still looking out the window. "Though I suppose choice is a luxury when you are born into certain families." Before Margaret could respond, they heard a sound outside. Scratching at the door, low growls, the sound of something testing the wood. Austin raised his rifle, moving to stand between Margaret and the door. The scratching continued, then stopped. A shadow moved past the oiled paper window. Margaret held her breath. Then the shadow moved away, and after a moment, Austin relaxed slightly. "They are testing our defenses, trying to figure out if there is an easy way in." "And if they decide to really try," Margaret asked, "then we will have problems. This door won't hold forever against determined wolves." He checked his rifle, counted his ammunition. Margaret watched his face, saw him doing calculations, weighing odds. "How well can you shoot?" "I've never fired a gun in my life." Austin sighed. "Of course you haven't. Well, if it comes to it, you are going to learn today. He pulled a pistol from his belt, checked it, and set it on the table. That's loaded. 6 shots. Point at what you want to hit and pull the trigger. The recoil will surprise you, so hold it tight. Margaret stared at the gun like it was a snake. I thought you said they probably wouldn't attack. I said they usually don't attack, but probably and definitely are 2 different words, and I prefer being prepared. They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun climbed higher, and the shack turned into an oven despite the shade. Margaret could feel sweat running down her back, plastering her hair to her neck. Her beautiful wedding dress was completely ruined now, stained with dust and sweat and probably blood from her scraped hands. She thought about Adelaide Harrison waiting at the church, his perfect plans disrupted. She tried to feel bad about it and was startled to realize she didn't. She felt afraid, yes, and uncomfortable, and worried about the driver who had been shot. But she didn't feel bad about missing her wedding. That realization was both terrifying and liberating. Austin gave her hardtack and jerky from his saddlebags, and they ate in silence. The food was tough and bland, nothing like the wedding breakfast that was supposed to follow her ceremony, but Margaret was hungry enough not to care. She watched Austin as he ate, noting the way he moved with economy and purpose. Nothing wasted. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, not like Adelaide with his carefully groomed beard and tailored suits. But there was something compelling about him, a competence and self-assurance that came from actually knowing how to survive in this harsh land. "How long have you been in Texas?" Margaret asked, wanting to break the silence. 3 years. I came down from Colorado after my parents died. Fever took them both within a week of each other. There wasn't anything left for me there, so I drifted south, picked up work where I could find it. I'm sorry about your parents. Austin shrugged, but Margaret saw the tightness around his eyes. It was a long time ago. I've made my peace with it. Do you have other family, a sister? She married a banker in Denver. We write sometimes, but we are not close. She thinks I should settle down, get a respectable job, stop wandering. He looked at Margaret and something in his expression softened. She sounds a bit like you, actually. Wants to make something of herself, but her husband keeps telling her a woman's place is in the home. Is she happy? Margaret asked. I don't think so, but she is safe and provided for, which I suppose is what matters to some people. Margaret thought about that. Safe and provided for. That was what her father wanted for her, what Adelaide offered. But sitting here in this lined shack, having nearly been killed by wolves, she felt more alive than she had in months of wedding planning and social obligations. It made no sense, but it was true. Tell me about working cattle, she said. What's it like? Austin settled back against the wall, keeping one eye on the window but relaxing slightly. It's hard work. Long days, longer nights during roundup. You get up before dawn, you ride all day in sun or rain or snow, you eat dust. You deal with ornery animals and even more ornery men. Your body aches all the time, and you are always either too hot or too cold. That sounds terrible, Margaret said. It is, Austin agreed. And it is also the best thing I have ever done. When you are out there on the range, it is just you and the land and the animals. No one cares who your family is or what your prospects are. They only care if you can do the work. And at night, when you are sitting around the fire with the other hands, eating beans and drinking coffee that could strip paint, listening to someone play a guitar and tell stories, you feel like you are part of something real, something that matters. Margaret heard the passion in his voice and felt a pang of envy. When was the last time she had felt that way about anything? When had her life become a series of obligations and expectations rather than choices and desires? You love it, she said. I do. Though I won't lie and say it is not lonely sometimes. wandering from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots. There are times I think about settling somewhere, finding a piece of land to call my own. But that takes money, and cowboys don't make much more than their beans and board." They fell silent again, and Margaret found herself studying his profile as he watched the window. He had a strong nose, a firm jaw, and those remarkable green eyes that seemed to miss nothing. There was a scar on his left cheekbone, white against his tanned skin, and his hands bore the marks of hard work. He was everything Adelaide Harrison was not, and Margaret felt something stirring in her chest that she had never felt for her fiancé. This was dangerous thinking. She pushed it away. "The wolves are leaving," Austin said suddenly. He stood, moving closer to the window. "I can see them heading north. They must have caught scent of something easier." Margaret felt relief flood through her. "So we can leave. We should wait a bit longer, make sure they are really gone. Then we need to check on your driver and get you back to town." He glanced at her. "Though I suppose your wedding is well and truly missed by now." Margaret looked down at her ruined dress, her scraped hands, her swollen ankle. She thought about walking into that church, hours late, looking like she had been dragged through the wilderness. She thought about Adelaide's disapproving face, her father's anger, the scandalized whispers of the assembled guests. "I can't go back like this," she said quietly. "You don't have a choice. Unless you plan to live in this line shack permanently, you have to go back to town eventually." "I know. I just mean I cannot go straight to the wedding. I need to go home first, clean up, explain what happened." She looked at Austin. "Will you take me to my father's house? It is on the north edge of town, the big white house with the green shutters." Austin nodded slowly. "I know the place. Thomas Rose's house. He owns half the land around Val Verde, and wants to own the other half," Margaret said with a trace of bitterness. "That is why he arranged my marriage to Adelaide. Railroad connections." They waited another hour to be certain the wolves were truly gone. Then Austin helped Margaret outside. The heat hit her like a physical force after the relative cool of the shack. Her ankle throbbed, and she knew she couldn't walk far. Austin solved the problem by lifting her onto his horse, then swinging up behind her. Margaret had never been so close to a man who wasn't family before, and she was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. They rode back to where the carriage lay overturned, and Margaret felt her stomach turn when she saw the driver. He was still slumped where he had fallen, and there was a lot of blood. Austin dismounted and checked him, and Margaret saw his shoulders sag with relief. "He is alive." The bullet went through his shoulder, missed anything vital. "He is passed out from blood loss, but if we get him to town, he should make it." Austin tore strips from his own shirt to bandage the wound, his movements quick and efficient. Then he managed to get the unconscious man draped over the horse's back, secured with rope from the saddle. It was awkward, and the horse didn't like the extra weight, but Austin spoke to her in low, soothing tones, and the mare settled. They had to walk, Austin leading the horse while Margaret clung to the saddle. It was slow going in the heat, and Margaret felt exhaustion settling into her bones. Her ankles screamed with every step the horse took, and her head pounded. But Austin kept up a steady pace, checking on both her and the driver regularly, offering water, making sure she didn't fall. It took 3 hours to reach Val Verde, and by the time they walked down the main street, Margaret was barely conscious. She was aware of people staring, of the gasps and whispers, of someone running ahead to spread the news. Then her father was there, pulling her off the horse, his face red with anger and fear and something that might have been relief. "Margaret, what happened? Where have you been?" "Adelaide has been waiting at the church for hours." "Wolves," Margaret managed. "Someone shot at our carriage." "Austin saved me." Her father seemed to notice Austin for the first time. His eyes swept over the dusty cowboy with barely concealed disdain. "I suppose we owe you thanks. I will have my foreman pay you for your trouble." Something in Austin's face closed off. "I don't need payment for doing what anyone decent would do. Nevertheless, you will be compensated. Margaret, we need to get you cleaned up. The wedding can still happen today if we hurry." Margaret stared at her father in disbelief. "Father, I was nearly killed. The driver is badly injured. I need rest, not a wedding." "Nonsense. You are fine, just a bit disheveled. Adelaide has been very patient, but we cannot put this off any longer. The contracts are signed. The guests are waiting. This wedding will happen today." Margaret felt Austin's eyes on her, and she suddenly saw the situation through his perspective. Her father didn't care that she had nearly died. He only cared about his business deal, his railroad connections. She was just a commodity to be traded, and her feelings, her fears, her near-death experience, none of that mattered as much as his ambitions. "No," she said quietly. Her father blinked. "What? No, I am not getting married today. I am going home to rest. Adelaide can wait, or he can leave." "I don't particularly care which. Margaret Rose, you will do as you are told. I will not have you embarrassing this family because of a little scare." A little scare. Margaret felt anger rising in her chest, hot and fierce. "Father, there were wolves. I watched them circle me, deciding whether to kill me right then or wait for me to die of thirst. If Austin hadn't come along, I would be dead right now. And all you care about is your business arrangement." Thomas Rose's face went from red to purple. "You are hysterical. This is exactly why women cannot be trusted to make important decisions. Now get in the house before you make this situation worse." Margaret saw Austin's jaw tighten, saw his hands clench into fists. For a moment she thought he might actually punch her father, and part of her wanted him to. But he controlled himself, just barely. "She is right to refuse," Austin said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Any man who cares more about a business deal than his daughter's life doesn't deserve her obedience." Thomas Rose turned on Austin, his eyes blazing. "How dare you speak to me that way? You are nothing but a drifter, a common laborer. You have no right to comment on family matters." "Maybe not, but I have eyes and I can see what is happening here. You are selling your daughter like she is a piece of livestock. Get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Austin looked at Margaret, and she saw the question in his eyes. She wanted to ask him to stay, to help her stand up to her father, but she knew that would only make things worse. She gave him a tiny nod, trying to convey gratitude and regret all at once. Austin touched his hat brim in a gesture that was somehow both respectful and defiant. "Miss Rose, I hope you find your courage." Then he turned and walked away, leading his horse with the injured driver still draped across its back toward the doctor's office. Margaret's father grabbed her arm and practically dragged her toward their house. Her mother met them at the door, her face pinched with worry and disapproval in equal measure. "Margaret, thank God you are safe. But what were you thinking, being seen in public in such a state? The whole town is talking." "I wasn't thinking anything, Mother. I was trying to survive." "Don't be dramatic. Now come inside and get cleaned up. We need to salvage what we can of this day." But Margaret had reached her limit. She pulled away from both her parents and stood in the doorway, swaying slightly on her injured ankle. "I am not marrying Adelaide Harrison. Not today, not ever." Her father's face went cold. "Is that your final word?" "Yes." "Then you leave me no choice. If you will not fulfill your duty to this family, you can leave this house. I will not support a daughter who refuses to obey." Margaret's mother gasped. "Thomas, you cannot mean that." "I mean every word. She has a choice. She can marry Adelaide as agreed, or she can make her own way in the world without our help." Margaret stood there, her ruined wedding dress hanging off her shoulders, her body aching, her mind reeling. She thought about the life that awaited her if she agreed. Adelaide Harrison's cold touch, a marriage of obligation, years of being a decorative object in a wealthy man's house. Then she thought about Austin's words, about living a life that felt real, that mattered. "Then I suppose I am leaving," she heard herself say. The words hung in the air for a long moment. Then her mother began to cry, and her father turned away, his face like stone. Margaret walked past them into the house, climbed the stairs to her room, and changed into a simple traveling dress. She packed a bag with her practical clothes, her books, and the small amount of money she had saved from birthday gifts over the years. It wasn't much, maybe $30, but it was something. When she came back downstairs, her father was in his study with the door closed. Her mother sat in the parlor, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Margaret, please reconsider," her mother said quietly. "You do not know what you are doing. A woman alone, with no family, no protection, it is not safe." "I nearly died this morning, Mother." "I have learned that safety is an illusion." Margaret kissed her mother's cheek, tasting tears. "I am sorry to disappoint you, but I cannot live the life you and Father have planned for me." She walked out of the house where she had grown up, the house that had always felt more like a cage than a home, and stood on the porch looking at Val Verde. It was a growing town, sitting in the rolling hills of Texas, full of opportunity for those brave enough to seize it. The year was 1878, and the West was still being built, still forming itself. There was space here for reinvention, for starting over. Margaret just had to figure out how to do it. Her first stop was the doctor's office, where she found Austin waiting while the doctor worked on the carriage driver. He looked surprised to see her, and even more surprised when he saw her traveling bag. "What happened?" he asked. "I left. My father gave me an ultimatum: marry Adelaide or leave his house, so I left." Austin stared at her. "Margaret, you cannot just leave. You have no money, no prospects, nowhere to go." "I have $30 and my education. That is more than many people start with." She tried to sound confident, but her voice shook slightly. Now that she was here, away from her father's anger and her mother's tears, reality was setting in. What had she done? "Where will you stay tonight?" Austin asked gently. "I thought perhaps the boarding house. Are there rooms available?" "Maybe. But Margaret, $30 won't last long. You need a plan." "I have a plan. I am going to find a teaching position." "You said good teachers are rare." "Well, I am educated. I can read and write and do mathematics. I know history and literature. Surely someone will hire me." Austin looked at her for a long moment, and Margaret saw something like admiration in his eyes. "You are braver than you think." "Or more foolish," Margaret said with a shaky laugh. The doctor emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. "The driver will recover. He is lucky. The bullet missed bone. He will need rest and care, but he should be fine in a few weeks." Margaret felt relief wash over her. "Thank God." "Can I see him?" "He is sleeping, but yes, briefly." The driver, a man named John who had worked for her father for years, looked pale but peaceful. Margaret touched his hand gently. "I am sorry you were hurt because of me." "Not your fault, miss," John murmured without opening his eyes. "Whoever shot at us, that is whose fault it is." Margaret had almost forgotten that detail in everything else that had happened. Someone had shot at her carriage. Why? Random robbery? Or something more targeted? She thought about Adelaide Harrison, about her father's business dealings, about the railroad plans that had brought them all together. She wondered if there was more to her near-death experience than simple bad luck, but that was a worry for another day. Right now, she needed to focus on survival. Austin walked with her to the boarding house, a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. The older woman looked Margaret up and down, taking in her practical dress and her travel-worn appearance. "I need a room," Margaret said, "just until I find a position. I have one room available, $2 a week, meals included." Margaret did the math quickly in her head. $30 meant 15 weeks if she spent nothing on anything else. That wasn't long to find work. But she nodded and counted out the money, Mrs. Patterson showed her to a small room on the second floor, clean but sparse. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window looking out onto the street. It was nothing like her bedroom at home with its four-poster bed and silk curtains, but it was hers. She had chosen it. After Mrs. Patterson left, Margaret sat on the bed and finally let herself feel everything she had been holding back. The fear from the wolves, the shock of her father's ultimatum, the terror of her own choices. She buried her face in her hands and shook, but she didn't cry. She was too tired for tears, too wrung out for anything but a bone-deep exhaustion. There was a knock on the door and Austin's voice called, "Margaret, can I come in?" She knew she should say no, that it was improper for a man to enter her room, but she didn't care about propriety anymore. "Yes." Austin came in, leaving the door open for appearances, and sat on the single chair by the window. "I have been thinking," he said, "about your situation. That makes one of us. I seem to have stopped thinking several hours ago." A faint smile crossed his face. "Understandable. But listen, I might be able to help. The Double J Ranch where I work, the owner's wife mentioned wanting to find a tutor for their children. 3 kids, ages 6 to 12. They are too far from town to attend regular school, and Mrs. Johansson wants them educated properly." Margaret looked up, hope flickering in her chest. "Do you think she would hire me? I don't know, but it is worth asking. I am heading back to the ranch tomorrow. You could come with me, meet the family. If nothing else, it is an opportunity." "Why are you helping me?" Margaret asked. "You don't know me. We only met this morning." Austin was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "This morning, when those wolves were circling, you didn't scream or fall apart. You were scared, I could see that, but you kept your head. You did what I told you to do, and you survived. Then, when your father tried to force you into a marriage you didn't want, you walked away from everything you knew rather than live a lie. That takes real courage, Margaret. The kind of courage that should be rewarded, not punished." Margaret felt warmth spreading through her chest, pushing back the fear and exhaustion. "You barely know me," she repeated, but softer this time. "Maybe, but I know enough." Austin stood. "Think about it tonight. If you want to come to the ranch tomorrow, meet me at the stable at dawn." The ride is about 4 hours. After he left, Margaret lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. 24 hours ago, she had been in her childhood bedroom, preparing for her wedding, her future laid out before her like a map. Now that map was gone, torn to pieces, and she was charting new territory without any guide but her own instincts. It was terrifying. It was also exhilarating. Margaret thought about Austin's face as he watched the wolves, the calm competence, the way he had positioned himself between her and danger without hesitation. She thought about his words, about courage and choices and living a life that felt real. She thought about teaching, about the dream she had set aside because her father said it wasn't appropriate for someone of her station. What station did she have now? She was a woman with $30 and a borrowed room, no family, no prospects except what she could create herself. That meant she could choose anything, be anyone. The realization was dizzying. Margaret closed her eyes and made her decision. Tomorrow at dawn, she would meet Austin at the stable. She would ride to the Double J Ranch and try for that teaching position. And if that didn't work, she would try something else. She would keep trying until she found her place in this wild, harsh, beautiful land. She fell asleep thinking about green eyes and steady hands, and the sound of a rifle shot that had saved her life. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky lightening from black to gray to pink as Margaret made her way to the stable. Her ankle was better, still tender but manageable, and she had dressed in her most practical clothes, a dark blue traveling dress and sturdy boots. She carried a small bag with a change of clothes and her precious books. Austin was already there, saddling his paint mare. He looked up as Margaret approached and nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might change your mind. Decide to make peace with your father, go back to your old life." Margaret shook her head firmly. "There is no going back, only forward." Austin finished with his horse and then brought out a second horse, a gentle bay mare. "This is Daisy. She is calm and patient, good for someone who doesn't ride much. Can you handle her? I have ridden before, though it has been a while. My father thought it was unladylike for me to ride astride, so I was always stuck with a side saddle and a groom following me around. Out here, side saddles will get you killed. You ride astride or you don't ride at all." Austin helped her mount, and Margaret was grateful for the practical split skirt she had chosen. It wasn't entirely proper, but neither was anything else she had done in the last day. They rode out of Val Verde as the sun climbed over the horizon, turning the landscape gold and orange. The air was cool but would be scorching in a few hours. Austin set an easy pace, letting the horses warm up gradually. Margaret found herself settling into the rhythm of Daisy's gait, her body remembering skills she thought she had forgotten. The land around them was rolling hills covered in grass and mesquite, punctuated by rocky outcroppings and the occasional stand of live oak trees. It was harsh country, beautiful in its own way but unforgiving of mistakes. Margaret saw cattle in the distance, longhorns with their distinctive wide horns, grazing in groups watched over by mounted cowboys. "This is all Double J land," Austin said, gesturing to the expanse around them. "Mr. Johansson runs about 5,000 head. It is a good operation, fair boss, decent pay. I have worked worse places." "Do you plan to stay?" Margaret asked. Austin shrugged. "For now. I like the work and the Johanssons are good people. But I am always thinking about the future, about saving enough to buy my own place someday. It is slow going on cowboy wages, but I am patient." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Margaret found herself studying Austin's profile again. In the morning light, she could see details she had missed yesterday. The laugh lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled more than he frowned. The way he sat his horse with easy grace, like he was part of the animal rather than just riding it. The gentle way he handled the reins, firm but never harsh. She thought about Adelaide Harrison, who had never ridden a horse in his life as far as she knew, who traveled by carriage and train, who viewed the West as something to be tamed and exploited rather than understood and respected. The contrast between the two men couldn't be sharper. "Can I ask you something personal?" Margaret said after a while. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Have you ever been married?" Austin glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "No. I have been close a couple times, but it never worked out. Ranch life is hard on relationships. Women want stability, a home, security. Cowboys offer campfires and uncertainty." "Not all women want the same things," Margaret said quietly. "Maybe not, but most do, and who can blame them? This is a hard life. Why would anyone choose it if they had easier options?" "Because easy and good are not the same thing," Margaret said. "Because sometimes the hard choice is the right choice." Austin looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I am beginning to." The Double J Ranch house appeared in the distance, a sprawling structure built of wood and stone, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, with flower gardens that spoke of a woman's touch and sturdy fences that suggested practical management. As they rode into the yard, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her late 30s, blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, her face weathered but kind. Her eyes went from Austin to Margaret with open curiosity. "Austin, you are back early, and with a guest." Austin dismounted and helped Margaret down, his hands steady on her waist. "Mrs. Johansson, this is Margaret Rose. She is the one I told you about, looking for a teaching position." Mrs. Johansson's eyebrows rose. "Rose? As in Thomas Rose's daughter? I heard something about a wedding that didn't happen yesterday." "That's right," Margaret said, deciding that honesty was the only policy that made sense. "I was supposed to marry Adelaide Harrison, but circumstances intervened. I have decided to pursue a different path." "Circumstances being wolves and an attempted shooting, from what I heard in town this morning," Mrs. Johansson said. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind. "That took courage, walking away from all that money and status. Or foolishness. Time will tell which." Mrs. Johansson laughed, a warm sound that made Margaret relax slightly. "I like you. Come inside, have some coffee, and we will talk. Austin, make yourself useful and tend to those horses." The ranch house interior was comfortable and lived in, with worn furniture and children's drawings pinned to the walls. The smell of baking bread filled the air, and Margaret's stomach growled in response. Mrs. Johansson noticed and smiled. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" "Yesterday morning before the wedding." "Then you will have breakfast with us. Coffee first, then we talk business." She poured 2 cups from a pot on the stove and gestured for Margaret to sit at the kitchen table. "So, tell me why you want to teach." Margaret wrapped her hands around the warm cup and thought about her answer. "Because I believe education changes lives. Because children deserve opportunities to learn and grow. Because I am good at it and I want to do something that matters." Pretty words. But teaching out here is not like teaching in a fancy school in Boston or Philadelphia. My children are ranch kids, wild and independent. They would rather be outside with the horses than inside with books. You would need patience and creativity and a firm hand when necessary. "I understand. And I'm willing to learn and adapt. I know I don't have formal training, but I have a good education myself. I can teach reading, writing, mathematics, history, literature. I am organized and reliable, and I genuinely care about children learning." Mrs. Johansson studied her over the rim of her coffee cup. "You are running from something. Adelaide Harrison, your father's expectations, whatever. I need to know you are running towards something too, not just away. Because if you are only running away, you will keep running, and I need someone who will stay at least through the school year." Margaret met her eyes steadily. "I am running toward the life I want to live, a life where I make my own choices and do work that feels meaningful. Yes, I am leaving behind my father's plans for me, but I am also choosing teaching, choosing independence, choosing to be more than just a wife for a man who sees me as a business asset." "Fair enough." Mrs. Johansson refilled both their cups. "Here is what I can offer. Room and board, plus $20 a month. You would teach my 3 children, mornings mostly, leaving afternoons free for their ranch chores. You would eat with the family, have your own room in the house. Sundays off. It's not a fortune, but it's honest pay for honest work." $20 a month. Margaret did the math quickly. In 6 months she would have enough saved to go to normal school if she wanted to get proper teaching credentials. In a year she would have real options. It was more than she had now. "I accept," Margaret said without hesitation. Mrs. Johansson smiled and extended her hand. "Then welcome to the Double J Ranch, Miss Rose." They shook on it, and Margaret felt something settle in her chest. This was real. She had a job, a place to live, a purpose. She had done it herself, without her father's connections or money, just on her own merits over breakfast, which included fresh eggs, bacon, biscuits, and that amazing bread she had smelled. Margaret met Mr. Johansson and the three children. Eric Johansson was a big man with a booming laugh and kind eyes, clearly devoted to his wife and children. The kids were Anna, 12, Lars, 9, and little Sophie, 6. They regarded Margaret with open curiosity but no hostility. "Will you really teach us every day?" Anna asked. She had her mother's blonde hair and a dusting of freckles across her nose. "Every morning," Margaret confirmed. "What do you like to learn about?" "Horses," Lars said immediately. "The stars," Anna said dreamily. "Stories," Sophie whispered, shy but interested. Margaret smiled. "Then we will learn about all of those things. Horses and stars and stories." After breakfast, Mrs. Johansson showed Margaret to her room, a small but comfortable space on the second floor with a window overlooking the corrals. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and private, and the bed looked infinitely more comfortable than the one at the boarding house. "You will start tomorrow," Mrs. Johansson said. "Today, rest and get settled. Austin mentioned you were injured in your ordeal. Just a twisted ankle. It is much better now. Still, take it easy. We will have plenty of time for hard work starting tomorrow." After Mrs. Johansson left, Margaret unpacked her few belongings and then stood at the window, watching the activity in the yard below. She saw Austin working with a young horse in one of the corrals, patient and gentle, letting the animal get used to his presence before attempting anything more. Other cowboys moved around, doing their various tasks, and the whole place hummed with purposeful activity. This was her life now. This ranch, these people, this work. Margaret felt a smile tugging at her lips. 24 hours ago, she had been about to marry a man she didn't love and enter a life that would have slowly suffocated her. Now she was free, poor but free, scared but hopeful. She saw Austin look up toward her window, as if sensing her watching. Their eyes met across the distance, and he touched his hat brim in a small salute. Margaret raised her hand in return, feeling warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. This was dangerous, this feeling. She had known him less than 2 days. He was a cowboy with no prospects, a drifter who had said himself he was always thinking about moving on. She was a woman trying to rebuild her life from nothing, in no position to complicate things with romantic feelings. But her heart didn't seem to care about logic. It had already started falling, and Margaret wasn't sure she wanted to stop it. The first weeks at the Double J Ranch passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Margaret discovered that teaching ranch children was indeed different from anything she had imagined. They were bright and curious, but their attention spans were short, and they had little patience for sitting still when there was a whole world of horses and cattle and open sky calling to them. So Margaret adapted. They learned mathematics by calculating cattle numbers and feed ratios. They studied geography by mapping the ranch lands and learning about different regions of Texas and beyond. They read adventure stories that captured their imagination and made them want to know what happened next. They studied the stars on clear evenings, learning constellations and navigation, things that mattered in a land where getting lost could mean death. Anna proved to have a quick mind and a hunger for knowledge that reminded Margaret of herself at that age. Lars was more restless but had a sharp wit and excelled at anything involving numbers. Little Sophie struggled with her letters but loved stories and would sit for hours listening to Margaret read. The Johanssons were good employers, treating Margaret like a valued member of the household rather than a servant. She ate meals with the family, joined in their evening conversations, helped Mrs. Johansson with household tasks when lessons were done. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way her old life had never been. And then there was Austin. He was around the ranch constantly, of course, working cattle, mending fences, breaking horses. Margaret found herself watching for him, noticing when he came in for meals with the other ranch hands, catching his eye across the yard. They had little opportunity for private conversation with so many people around, but small moments accumulated. A shared smile when Lars made a particularly terrible pun during dinner. Austin bringing her a lost book that had fallen off her saddle during a ride. Margaret stitching up a torn shirt for him when she noticed the ripped seam. These small exchanges felt weighted with something more, though neither of them spoke it aloud. One evening, about 3 weeks after Margaret arrived at the ranch, she was sitting on the porch in the twilight, enjoying the brief cool of the day's end. Austin came around the corner of the house, clearly looking for her. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Please." He settled on the porch rail, keeping a respectable distance but close enough to talk quietly. "You have been here almost a month. How are you settling in?" "Better than I expected. The children are wonderful and the Johanssons are kind. I feel useful here. Like what I do matters." "It does matter. Anna was telling me today about the book you are reading with them, some adventure story. She was so excited she could barely get the words out. I have never seen her that animated about schoolwork before." Margaret felt pleasure at the praise. She has a gift for learning. She should go to a real school someday, get proper education. Maybe she will, thanks to you giving her a foundation. Austin looked out at the darkening landscape. "Your father came by the ranch a few days ago." Margaret's stomach tightened. "What did he want?" "To speak to Mr. Johansson about you. He said you were mentally unwell, that the shock of the wolf attack had disturbed your reason. He wanted Mr. Johansson to send you home." "What did Mr. Johansson say?" "Told him that you seemed perfectly sane to him, and that you were an adult free to make your own choices. Your father didn't like that answer. He made some threats about business dealings, about cutting off trade relationships." Margaret closed her eyes. "I'm sorry. I never meant to cause problems for the Johanssons. They are not worried. Mr. Johansson said any man who tries to use business pressure to force his daughter into an unwanted marriage is not someone he wants to deal with anyway." Austin paused. "Your father also mentioned Adelaide Harrison." "Apparently he left town, went back east. The railroad deal fell through without the wedding connection." Margaret tried to feel guilty about that and couldn't quite manage it. "I suppose I should care, but I find that I don't." "Good. You shouldn't care." Austin turned to look at her directly. "Margaret, I need to tell you something." The serious tone made Margaret's heart speed up. "What is it?" "I have been offered a job. A friend of mine is starting a ranch up near Abilene, needs experienced hands to help get it established. It is good pay, and he is offering a partnership stake to his first 3 hires. It's the kind of opportunity that could let me stop drifting and actually build something." Margaret felt her chest tighten. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity." "It is, but it means leaving here." "Leaving the Double J?" He paused, his eyes searching her face. "Leaving you." The words hung in the air between them. Margaret wanted to say something, to ask him to stay, to tell him that she had been falling for him since that first morning when he stood between her and the wolves. But what right did she have? They had shared no promises, spoken no words of love. She had no claim on him. "When would you leave?" she asked, proud that her voice stayed steady. "End of the month, 3 weeks from now, 3 weeks. Not enough time and too much time all at once." "You should go," Margaret said, though every word hurt. "You said yourself you wanted to stop drifting, to build something of your own. This is your chance." "Is that really what you want me to do?" Austin asked quietly. Margaret looked at him, at this man who had saved her life and helped her find a new path. This man whose presence made her heart race and whose absence would leave a hole in her days. She thought about asking him to stay, but what could she offer him? She had no money, no prospects beyond her teaching position, nothing but herself and feelings that might be nothing more than gratitude confused with something deeper. "What I want doesn't matter," she said. "This is your life, your decision. You should do what's best for your future." Austin studied her for a long moment, and Margaret saw a disappointment flicker across his face. "Right, my future." He stood abruptly. "I should get back to the bunkhouse, early day tomorrow." He walked away into the darkness, and Margaret sat alone on the porch, wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake. The next 3 weeks were torture. Margaret threw herself into teaching, into helping Mrs. Johansson with extra tasks, into anything that would keep her mind occupied. But she couldn't stop noticing Austin, couldn't stop watching him work, couldn't stop the ache in her chest every time she thought about him leaving. Mrs. Johansson noticed, of course. She was too observant not to. "You are in love with him," she said one afternoon while they were preparing vegetables for dinner. Margaret didn't bother denying it. "Yes." "Have you told him?" "No, what would be the point? He is leaving for a better opportunity. I won't be the reason he turns that down." "So you are just going to let him go without saying anything?" "What else can I do? I have nothing to offer him. I'm just a teacher with barely 2 months' wages saved." Mrs. Johansson set down her knife and looked at Margaret seriously. "Love is not about what you can offer in terms of money or status. It's about building a life together, supporting each other, choosing to be partners through whatever comes. Austin is not a man who cares about money or social position. He cares about honesty and courage and real connection. But his opportunity in Abilene will still be there whether you speak your heart or not. But if you don't tell him how you feel, you will spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." "Is that really what you want?" Margaret thought about that as she finished dinner preparations. She thought about it through the meal, sneaking glances at Austin sitting with the other ranch hands at the long table. She thought about it as she cleaned up afterward, and as she prepared for bed. Mrs. Johansson was right. She would regret not speaking up, even if Austin left anyway. She would always wonder. The next morning, Margaret asked Mrs. Johansson for the morning off and went looking for Austin. She found him in the breaking corral, working with a young stallion, his movements patient and methodical. She waited until he finished the session and led the horse back to its stall before approaching him. "Can we talk?" she asked. Austin looked surprised but nodded. "Sure. Let me just finish here." They walked out toward a grove of live oak trees at the edge of the ranch property, far enough from the house for privacy but still in sight. Margaret's heart was pounding so hard she thought Austin must be able to hear it. "You are leaving in 3 days," she said without preamble. "Yes." "And you are taking the job in Abilene." "I haven't given my final answer yet, but I'm planning to, yes." Margaret took a deep breath. This was it. No going back after she said the words. "I need to tell you something before you go. I'm in love with you." Austin went very still. "Margaret, please, let me finish. I know this is probably just gratitude confused with attraction. I know we have only known each other a few months. I know I have no right to say this when you are about to start a new life. But Mrs. Johansson said I would regret not telling you, and she's right. So there it is. I'm in love with you, Austin Harper, and I needed you to know before you left." The silence stretched between them, and Margaret wanted to die. This had been a mistake. She had just humiliated herself for nothing. Then Austin stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands, his palms rough with calluses but infinitely gentle. "You beautiful, brave, impossible woman," he murmured. I have been in love with you since you stood up to your father and walked away from everything rather than live a lie. I have been in love with you every morning when I watch you teaching those kids, seeing how patient you are, how creative, how much you care. I have been in love with you every evening when you laugh at Lars's terrible jokes and help Mrs. Johansson with dinner and fit into this ranch life like you were born to it. Margaret felt tears stinging her eyes. Then, why were you leaving? Because I thought you deserved better than a cowboy with nothing but dreams and $40 saved. Because I thought you needed stability and security after everything you had been through. Because I was trying to do the right thing even though it was killing me. The right thing is us being together, Margaret said fiercely. I don't care about money or security or any of that. I care about you, about building a life with someone who sees me for who I really am, not who my father wanted me to be. Austin pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. I don't have much to offer. Just a partnership stake in a ranch that doesn't exist yet, hard work, and an uncertain future. That's enough. That's more than enough. Margaret pulled back to look him in the eyes. Take me with you, to Abilene, to your friend's ranch. Let me be part of building that future with you. What about your teaching position here? The children can be taken over by someone else. The Johanssons will understand. This is my choice, Austin. You, this. Us. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious. Margaret leaned into him, into the solid warmth of his chest, the strength of his arms around her. This was right. This was what she had been searching for without even knowing it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Austin kept his arms around her. Marry me, he said. Before we go to Abilene, I want to do this properly, not just run off together. Marry me, Margaret. Yes, Margaret said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, yes. They were married a week later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with the Johanssons and the ranch hands as witnesses. Margaret wore a simple dress that Mrs. Johansson helped her sew, cream-colored with blue trim. Nothing like the elaborate wedding gown that had been destroyed in the wolf attack. But it felt more truly hers than that expensive silk ever had. Austin wore his best clothes, which still looked like cowboy gear but was clean and carefully pressed. He stood beside her, holding her hand, promising to love and honor and cherish her for all their days. And when the traveling preacher pronounced them married, Austin kissed her with a tenderness that made Margaret's heart overflow. They left for Abilene 2 days later, riding together on Austin's horse, Margaret's arms wrapped around his waist, her few possessions packed in saddlebags. The journey took 5 days, camping under the stars at night, talking for hours about their dreams and plans and hopes for the future. Austin's friend, James Walker, welcomed them warmly to his growing ranch outside Abilene. The operation was still in its early stages, just a rough cabin and some basic corrals, but the land was good, and James had vision and determination. With Austin's partnership and Margaret's organizational skills and willingness to work, the ranch began to take shape. Those first years were hard. They lived in a tiny cabin that leaked when it rained and froze in winter. Money was tight, and there were times when Margaret wondered if they would make it. But Austin was right there beside her, working from dawn until well past dark, never complaining, always finding reasons to hope. Margaret found work teaching the children of neighboring ranches, earning a little extra money while helping Austin with the books and ranch management. She discovered she had a talent for business, for negotiating deals and managing resources. Austin discovered he had a talent for breeding horses, developing a line of sturdy, intelligent animals that became sought after throughout the region. Slowly, the ranch prospered. They added cattle, improved the buildings, hired their first ranch hand. 3 years after they arrived in Abilene, they built a proper house, still modest but comfortable, with a bedroom and a kitchen and a room that could be used for teaching or, Margaret hoped, for a nursery someday. That someday came sooner than expected. Margaret discovered she was pregnant in the fall of 1881, 4 years after the morning when wolves had nearly killed her. She was 24 years old now, hardened by sun and work, but happy in a way she had never imagined possible. Austin was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. What if something goes wrong? He worried. The nearest doctor is 10 miles away. What if you need help? Then you will ride for the doctor, Margaret said calmly. Women have been having babies on ranches for generations. I will be fine. She was right. Their son was born on a warm spring morning in 1882, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him Thomas, after Margaret's father, a gesture of forgiveness that Margaret hadn't known she needed until she made it. She sent word to her parents, unsure if they would respond. To her surprise, her mother came to visit when Thomas was 2 months old. The reunion was tearful and tentative, years of hurt and misunderstanding hanging between them. But holding her grandson seemed to soften something in Margaret's mother, and they began the slow process of rebuilding their relationship. Margaret's father never came, never forgave her for defying him. He died 2 years later, and Margaret attended the funeral with Austin beside her, holding her hand through the grief and complicated relief. Her mother moved to Abilene after that, bought a small house in town, and became a regular presence in their lives, doting on Thomas and later on his siblings, because there were siblings. 2 years after Thomas came Elizabeth, named after Margaret's mother. Then 2 years after that, another son, David. The house that had seemed so spacious suddenly felt cramped with 3 young children, so they built an addition, then another. The ranch continued to grow, prospering beyond their early dreams. By 1890, 12 years after that fateful morning with the wolves, Austin and Margaret owned one of the most successful ranches in the region. They employed a dozen hands, ran 2,000 head of cattle and a prized horse breeding program. Their children were healthy and happy, growing up wild and free in the way ranch children did, learning to ride before they could properly walk, helping with chores as soon as they were old enough. Margaret still taught, though now it was mostly her own children and a few neighbors' kids who rode over for lessons. She had the books and materials she needed, and her makeshift schoolroom was better equipped than many official schools in the area. Anna Johansson, now grown and married herself, corresponded regularly with Margaret, crediting her early education with giving her the confidence to become a teacher herself. On a warm September evening in 1890, Margaret sat on the porch of their house, watching Austin work with a young horse in the corral. He was 37 now, still strong and capable, though his dark hair was starting to show threads of silver. Their oldest son, Thomas, now 8, was helping him, mirroring his father's patient movements with the colt. Margaret thought about the girl she had been 12 years ago, about to marry a man she didn't love, trapped by expectations and duty. She thought about the wolves, about the terror of that morning, about Austin riding over the ridge like something out of a story. She thought about all the choices she had made since then, all the hard times and good times, all the ways her life had unfolded in directions she never could have predicted. Austin finished with the horse and walked over to the porch, Thomas running ahead to ask if he could go play before dinner. Austin climbed the steps and sat beside Margaret, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, taking her hand. "The wolves," Margaret said. "That morning when you saved me." Austin squeezed her fingers. "I remember. You were wearing that ridiculous wedding dress, all torn and dusty. You looked like an angry angel, Margaret laughed. I was terrified. You were brave. I wasn't. I was just too scared to panic properly. She turned to look at him, this man who had changed the course of her life. Do you remember what I said later? After we were in the line shack and the wolves were still outside. Austin thought for a moment. You said a lot of things that day. I said you were braver than my fears, Margaret said softly. That was true then, and it's still true now. You gave me the courage to choose a different life, to be more than what other people expected. Austin lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. You did that yourself. I just held the wolves back long enough for you to realize you could. They sat together in the gathering dusk, watching their children play in the yard, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. In the distance, Margaret heard a wolf howl, that distinctive sound that had once filled her with terror. Now it was just part of the landscape, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. The years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. There were good seasons and bad seasons, years of plenty and years of drought. In 1893, another daughter arrived, Sarah, who had her father's green eyes and her mother's determination. The children grew and thrived, each developing their own personality and dreams. Thomas wanted to be a rancher like his father, spending every moment he could with the animals. Elizabeth loved books and reading, often helping Margaret with teaching the younger children. David was the adventurous one, always climbing too high or riding too fast, giving his parents constant worry and pride in equal measure. Sarah, the baby, was too young yet to show her path, but she had a sunny disposition that brought joy to everyone around her. The ranch continued to prosper, but Austin and Margaret never forgot where they came from. They helped neighboring ranches during hard times, offered jobs to drifters who needed work, supported the growing community of Abilene as it developed from a rough cattle town into a proper city. Margaret served on the school board, pushing for better education opportunities for all children, not just those from wealthy families. In 1895, Margaret received a letter from Val Verde. It was from John, the carriage driver who had been shot that fateful day. He had recovered fully and was now working as a deputy sheriff. He wrote to tell her that he had finally tracked down the man who had shot at them. It turned out to be a hired gun working for a business rival of Adelaide Harrison's, meant to disrupt the wedding and the railroad deal. The shooter had been tried and convicted, and John thought Margaret would want to know that justice had been served. Margaret showed the letter to Austin that evening. All this time, I thought maybe it was random violence, but it was planned. Someone actually tried to kill me to disrupt a business deal. Austin's jaw tightened. I'm glad they caught him, though I wish I had been the one to do it. I'm not, Margaret said. If you had gone hunting for him, you might have been hurt or killed, and then where would we be? No, I'm glad it's over, and I'm glad we were already far away when they finally caught him. She folded the letter and put it away. That chapter of her life was closed, had been closed for years. The terrified girl in the torn wedding dress was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own strength, who had built a life on her own terms. The children grew older. Thomas, at 14, was already working full-time on the ranch, showing a natural talent for both cattle and horses that made Austin proud. Elizabeth, at 12, talked about going away to school, about becoming a real teacher with proper credentials. Margaret encouraged her, even though the thought of her daughter leaving made her heart ache. David, at 10, was still wild but showed signs of developing into a fine young man. And Sarah, at 3, was the delight of the household, spoiled by her older siblings but in the best way. In 1897, Austin and Margaret celebrated 20 years since that morning when the wolves had brought them together. They had a party on the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. The Johansons came, still running the Double J successfully. Anna came with her husband and 2 children of her own. Even Margaret's mother came, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever. That evening, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Austin and Margaret walked out to the grove of cottonwood trees by the creek, where they often went to talk privately. 20 years, Austin said, pulling Margaret close. Has it been what you expected? I had no expectations, Margaret admitted. That morning with the wolves, I was just trying to survive. I couldn't have imagined all of this. She gestured at the ranch spread out below them, the house with its warm lights, the barns and corrals, the life they had built together. Any regrets? Austin asked. Margaret thought about that seriously. There had been hard times, moments when she questioned her choices, days when the work seemed endless and the future uncertain. But regrets? None, she said firmly. Not a single one. Everything that seemed like the end of the world back then, my father disowning me, losing my comfortable life, starting over with nothing, those were actually beginnings. The best beginnings. Austin kissed her temple. You were braver than your fears. That's what you told me, remember? In the line shack when the wolves were outside. Did I say that? You did. And you were right. You faced down everything that scared you and you came out stronger. We came out stronger, Margaret corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. We make a good team. They stood together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the cottonwood leaves, the far-off howl of a wolf that was no longer a source of fear, but simply part of the landscape they called home. The years continued their steady march. Thomas married at 21, a good woman from a neighboring ranch, and brought his wife to live with them while he and Austin built a second house on the property. Elizabeth did go away to school, came back with teaching credentials, and started a school in Abilene that served children from all backgrounds. David, true to his adventurous nature, left for a while to see the wider world, worked on ranches in Colorado and Montana, and eventually came back to Abilene, having decided that home was where he wanted to be. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's quiet strength. She married a young lawyer in town, someone who valued her mind as much as her beauty, and Margaret saw in their relationship echoes of her own marriage, built on respect and genuine partnership. By 1905, Austin and Margaret were grandparents several times over, their house often filled with the noise and chaos of grandchildren. Austin was 52 now, his hair more silver than dark, his body showing the years of hard work. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man who had saved Margaret from the wolves all those years ago. Margaret was 47, her hair showing threads of gray, her face lined by sun and time but still beautiful to Austin. She had lived the life she chose, done work that mattered, raised children who were good people, built something lasting and real. On a cool autumn morning in 1905, Margaret woke to find Austin already awake, watching her with a soft smile. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "Just remembering," he said. "That morning, 27 years ago, the wolves, the line shack, the moment I realized I was falling in love with a woman in a torn wedding dress who was braver than she knew." Margaret reached for his hand. "I was so scared that day. Not just of the wolves, but of everything. Of choosing wrong, of making a mistake, of ending up alone and destitute. And instead I ended up here, with you, with this life." She looked around their bedroom, at the comfortable furniture they had chosen together, the photographs of their children and grandchildren on the walls, the window looking out onto the ranch that was their legacy. "I chose right, Austin. We chose right." He pulled her close, and they lay together in the early morning quiet, two people who had built a life from nothing but courage and love and determination. The ranch continued to thrive under their management, though they gradually turned over more responsibility to Thomas and his wife. Austin trained his son carefully, passing on everything he had learned in 30 years of ranching. Margaret worked with Elizabeth to establish more schools in the region, using the money they had earned over the years to fund education for children whose families couldn't afford it. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1908, surrounded by children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors. Margaret looked around at the gathering, at all these lives that had been touched by that one morning when wolves had nearly killed her, when Austin had ridden to her rescue, when she had made the brave choice to leave everything familiar and build something new. "What are you thinking?" Austin asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I love you," Margaret said simply. "That I'm grateful for every day we've had together, even the hard ones. That I wouldn't change a single thing." "Not even the wolves?" Austin asked with a smile. "Especially not the wolves. They brought me to you." As the sun set over their ranch, turning the Texas sky brilliant shades of orange and red, Austin pulled Margaret into his arms and held her close. Behind them, their children and grandchildren laughed and talked, the sound of family filling the air. "You were braver than your fears," Austin murmured into her hair. "You still are." Margaret leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about that terrified girl in the torn wedding dress, about the wolves circling, about the moment when everything changed. She thought about all the years since, all the choices and challenges and joys, all the ways her life had unfolded in beautiful, unexpected directions. The ranch stretched out around them, bathed in golden evening light. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, that sound that had once meant terror and now meant only wildness and freedom. Margaret smiled, knowing that she had found both in her life, wildness and freedom and love and purpose, all wrapped together in this existence she had built with Austin. They had started with nothing but courage and each other. They had faced down wolves and poverty and social disapproval, and all the thousand small challenges that came with building a life on the frontier. And they had won, not by defeating their enemies, but by simply refusing to give up, by choosing love over fear, by believing that they could make their own path, even when the whole world said it was impossible. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Austin and Margaret walked hand in hand back to their house, their family following behind them. The lights of home glowed warm and welcoming, and inside waited all the simple comforts they had worked so hard to build: food and fire and soft beds, and the deep satisfaction of work well done. Margaret paused at the door and looked back one more time at the land they had claimed and tamed and made their own. She thought about that terrified girl from so long ago and wished she could tell her that everything would be okay, that the scary choice was the right choice, that walking away from everything familiar would lead to everything she never knew she needed. But maybe that girl had known on some level. Maybe when she chose to stand up to her father, to refuse a loveless marriage, to strike out on her own with nothing but hope and determination, maybe she had known deep down that she was brave enough for whatever came next. Austin squeezed her hand. "Ready to go inside?" "Yes," Margaret said, and meant it in every possible way. Yes to their life together. Yes to the choices they had made. Yes to every day that had brought them to this moment. Yes to the love they had built and nurtured and made the foundation of their world. They went inside together. closing the door behind them on another day, another year, another chapter in a story that had started with wolves and fear and courage, and had grown into something richer and deeper and more lasting than either of them could have imagined on that fateful September morning so many years ago. The end.